All right, welcome friends. Today is a video that's a little more in-depth and involved than any that you've seen quite so far from this channel. This is a presentation that I developed to do with Mr. Rufus Reid at the ISJAC, International Society of Jazz Arrangers and Composers Convention in May of 2024. We're talking about J.J. Johnson's large ensemble music, and you're going to want to stick around to the end of this because you're going to get to see something very few people got to see. A special presentation that we did of JJ's music here at UNT, the University of North Texas, back in March of 2024. You're going to want to stick around to hear a really awesome story and a really awesome video. So we'll check that out. But today I wanted to go through what we are doing at the ISJAC Conference. If you don't know who I am, my name is Nick Finzer. I am a jazz trombonist, a composer, and a professor at the University of North Texas. And in 2024 is the 100th year, the Centennial of Mr. J.J. Johnson. If you don't know JJ's music, if you don't know JJ, you can check out this celebration that we did on this new album project that came out this year, featuring JJ's last touring band, which is Rini Rosnes at the piano, Rufus Reid on the bass, and Louis Nash at the drums. And we are celebrating JJ and his legacy. You can scan that QR code quickly if you want to go and hear that new record at some point on your own. But, this is my sixth or seventh project as a leader and my first time being able to pay tribute to one of my heroes in a recorded output in a recording project. And so I'm really excited about that. But today we're here not only to talk about JJ and his important contributions to the music as a player, but also as a composer and an arranger, an orchestrator, and the work he did for Large Ensemble, because some of that stuff is not talked about quite as much. Everybody knows that J.J. Johnson was a fantastic trombonist. He's kind of set the standard, set the bar for modern jazz trombone playing, and none of us jazz trombone players would be here without JJ and his amazing influence, setting the standard of technique, translating the language of bebop from Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie and Bud Powell onto trombone to make it accessible for trombonists, not just translated note for note, but adapted so that it was playable on the trombone and that it was able to be effectively communicated on the trombone, not just a technical mastery, technical exercise, but actually music making on the trombone with the bebop language and the translation thereof. So JJ, so important and often overlooked. A colleague of mine a couple of years ago, before I realized that 2024 was the centennial of JJ Johnson, he came up to me and said, "Hey man, does anyone actually check out JJ Johnson?" And I was like, well, I mean, yeah, because sometimes we take him for granted, I think. JJ is the obvious answer most of the time when you think of jazz trombone, J.J. Johnson. But do people really take the time to dig deep and kind of understand the multifaceted nature of his career and the contributions he made to the music? Because it's not just as a trombone player. The trombone playing obviously is amazing. The trombone playing is obviously extremely important and influential, but is only one of the things that he leaves in his legacy. And that is why I call it the project legacy. And here we are. So as I mentioned at the top of the video, at the live presentation, I did this alongside Rufus Reid, who is an amazing composer in his own right. And he actually played with JJ on many of his projects, which we'll touch on later. But so what are we going to talk about today in detail? Well, let me tell you, we're going to be talking about JJ's tune writing and its evolution. We're going to talk a little bit about the third stream movement with Gunther Schuller, Jimmy Giuffre, and JJ, John Lewis, and the third stream movement and kind of how he interacts with that whole side of the music history. How he brought a whole new dimension of ensemble writing to jazz through that work with Dizzy Gillespie in the 1950s, and how that leads to his seminal 1997 release, The Brass Orchestra, and how JJ's musicality and musicianship as an improviser are developed alongside his work as a composer and an arranger. This is something that I talk to my students about all the time, and how those two voices are linked together. And the more you develop as a composer, the more you're going to develop as an improviser, and vice versa. The more developed improviser you are, the better composer you can be, because if you ask a lot of people, they'll tell you that improvising is spontaneous composition, and JJ was a master at both. So here's JJ. If you don't know about him and kind of where he came from, this is a picture taken at Rudy Van Gelder's recording studio, actually where we recorded the new album Legacy, the very same room. And fun story, right when we got, during our first break at the session, Don Sickler, who runs Second Floor Music in New York, he and his wife Maureen are also in charge of the studio there. And so they brought out the chair that JJ was sitting on in this picture, and showed us the photo in the chair and everything. And it was just a nice moment. But JJ Johnson, he was born in 1924 in Indianapolis, Indiana. Of course, there's the home of many great jazz musicians like Freddie Hubbard, Slide Hampton, Wes Montgomery, and more. He started playing trombone there, but his first big gig came with Snookum Russell. When he's in that band, he meets trumpeters Fats Navarro, and who also shows him Lester Young. And he later joins Benny Carter's orchestra and makes his first recording in 1943 in the first Jazz at the Philharmonic. He moves on to be in the Count Basie band for a short period of time, and then in 1946 he leaves the big bands and starts being mentored by Dizzy. He starts to develop some of that bebop sensibility is in New York City. He worked with people like Illinois Jacquet, Max Roach, Sonny Stitt, Bud Powell, Sonny Rollins, so many people. And he starts recording with Charlie Parker in December of 1947. And as you'll know, and we'll talk about later, people like Miles Davis as well. And Miles actually recorded some of his music, like Kilo is a tune, Enigma is another, that Miles recorded of JJ. So there's a lot of jazz musicians that JJ interacts with in his career, and there is a lot of history there. That's kind of how he got started. Of course, he ends up doing a lot of things in his career, but we'll get to that in a moment. What I want to do now is show you the JJ Johnson Quintet from May 4th. There's Rufus Reid on the left, Rini Rosnes to his right, and then that's Billy Drummond in the center, who's not on the recording and on the project, but Lewis Nash also played in the band at this time, JJ, and Ralph Moore on the tenor saxophone. That's from May 4th, 1993. So what I wanted to do is show a little bit of this band that's not as well known. They have a live recording. You can find it on YouTube, playing some of JJ's originals. Rufus at the live talk gave us some insight into this composition and insight into what was happening with the band at that time. They're at the Umbria Jazz Festival in 1993. JJ actually took time off from playing the trombone, if you don't know, and he moved to LA to become a film composer, and then he stopped doing that. And he kind of had this big coming out party to come back to the music, to come back to performing live at the Village Vanguard in 1988. And that's when Rufus Reid first starts playing with JJ Johnson. So this is about 5 years in to that. And this is a tune called Quintergy, which is one of the names of the records that they recorded live at the Village Vanguard in 1988. But Rufus goes on to record them on records like Vivian, Let's Hang Out, the Brass Orchestra, and there's another one called Heroes. Both of those were recorded after JJ retired again from playing. But what I want to do is kind of just check out this composition, the small group composition. It's definitely coming out of the third stream stuff, and he's using a lot of different, not a lot of information to make a lot of music, is what I'm about to get to.
Here's one, an original that we call Quintergy.
JJ speaks.
Quintergy.
Very clear. used to from Yeah, so this one shows kind of the different styles that JJ was kind of moving through and different kind of things he was dealing with at different point in his career. I just think it's interesting and worth talking about and sharing, because that part of his life, that part of his career, not as talked about as kind of the 40s, 50s, 60s era, early 60s, and then I think it's important to just be able to show kind of all this influence that he's had. There's so many people that are making music like that. He was doing that in the early 90s, in the late 80s. He was right there with anyone else doing whatever. He was always listening and always kind of appreciating things that were happening in the music. So, we're going to go back to the beginning, kind of work our way forward here again. And it all started with kind of writing really tuneful bebop style tunes in the late 1940s. I think a sense of tunefulness kind of starts right from the beginning, and I think he gets it from a lot of study and listening to people like Lester Young. And so what I want to do now is let JJ speak to you for a second, and he's going to tell you a little bit about that time listening and appreciating Lester Young.
Just how did you formulate your concept at a time when there was no trombone player playing in the style that you eventually refined?
Is the tape rolling?
Yes, sir.
Tape is rolling. Well, as I indicated yesterday, Tom, and I'll have to reiterate and be a little redundant, that my first, the first jazz soloist and or stylist that had a severe impact on me that was to last for the rest of my life was Lester Young. This is long before Bird and Diz. And I was still in high school, to tell you the truth, and I got in with a bunch of guys, and we were all, there was Vincent Stewart, a saxophone player, there was Eldridge Marshall, a trumpet player. These are all local guys in Indianapolis in high school and whatnot. With another trumpet player, Merrill Left. We were all Lester Young-aholics. We sat down together, and we memorized all of Lester's solos. We could hum every Lester Young solo there was. So I'm trying to answer your question as best I can by saying that Lester Young was the first one who left an indelible mark on me that relates to the linear way of playing. So it was the trombonist who first triggered my interest in that manner of communicating on the instrument. It happened to be Lester.
When you first started being enamored with Lester and playing him, did you find any difficulty in transferring those lines to the trombone and the awkwardness of the trombone?
Man, great difficulty. Let's face it, great difficulty.
How did you overcome that? Were there any particular exercises?
Just practicing scales and just being determined to try to find a way to approach that way of playing and try to bring it off. It was quite awkward. I listened to my first records and I'm sometimes embarrassed because I'm getting started in the bebop, but they sound so awkward and labored. And it was labored and awkward, let's face it, in the beginning. And it was just through diligence and practice and determination and just dogged tenacity that I just forced myself to hang in there and try to make it happen. I was fortunate in hooking up with guys like, when I finally met Dizzy for the first time, and Dizzy had a chance to hear me play, and there was something in my playing that gave Dizzy this impression that, well, this guy could probably turn the trick, and he needs encouragement. And man, he was so beautiful. He encouraged me. He like embraced me in a manner of speaking like, hey, man, you're it.
Hey, man, you're it. Isn't that beautiful? I think this kind of really sets up kind of what we're going to look at now. His voice as an improviser, his voice as a composer, so intertwined. And so the next thing we're going to look at here, some of his early bebop tunes. So I've mentioned he was working with Illinois Jacquet, so he wrote this tune, Contrafact on Robin's Nest. It's called Boneology, where he's using a lot of those bebop shapes and a lot of accents to the chromatic language, accents to bring out the life in the music. And so check this out. 'Cause beautiful solo. And so you can hear Robin's Nest, the original tune in there. You can kind of hear the beginning of some of these chromatic 2/5s that are getting thrown in by people like Dizzy and Bud Powell. And then check this out. So this is from a year later, Elora, both of these came off as singles, 10-inch singles. We get bebop solos from those guys. And then we're going to flash forward to 1954 here. This comes from the eminent J.J. Johnson. So here is the development of that. You're going to hear how the melodic sounds of J.J. and his melodic sensibilities coming out of Lester Young are kind of melded with these bebop style chromaticisms and bebop style kind of fast lines, fast moving harmony. So check this out. This is Viscosity. can hear kind of the sophistication in the harmony and the lines. You can hear just how he's grown in just a few years. We had 1948, 1949. Now we have 1954, and his whole concept has been refined and developed. He's now the leader, kind of making records not only as with these other bebop pioneers, but being kind of the front man and developing into this kind of post-bop, hard bop kind of thing that comes after the bebop era in the 50s. He's right there with obviously people like Hank Mobley and Clifford Brown and people like that get into this scene. But simultaneous to this, he was also leading bands in writing original music. So probably this most well-known tune is Lament. So right now I want to show you a couple of versions of Lament to kind of show you how his compositions were used by not only himself but other people and kind of people he was working with and were influenced by. So in my research, kind of looking back, the first recording of this tune Lament is this 2-trombone version that he did with Jay and Kay. So Kay Winding, a great other trombonist. Fun fact, it was supposed to be Benny Green, but the record company changed their mind about who they wanted to be with Jay. And he talks about that in some interviews. But nonetheless, we're going to check out just this original version of Lament with J and K, and so we can kind of see how other people kind of reinterpret his vision. And it's very post-bop, it's a great melody, very melodic, just like we've been saying this whole time. A little introduction here. Now this lead sheet obviously is just kind of a simplified lead sheet. Simple interpretation of this. Some basic counterpoint here, 2 voices. Chromatic 2/5s that aren't on this lead sheet. So there's the first day of that. So that's the first version, 1954, J and K. You then move ahead to a very important thing. Jay was hanging out with Miles, right? This is pretty obvious. And Jay was getting inspired by what Miles is doing. Miles is getting inspired by what JJ's doing. I mentioned he recorded 2 of his tunes, Kilo being one of those, which is more like a bop tune, but he goes on to include Lament in Miles Ahead from 1957. Now, this is going to tie into what we're talking about with JJ's large ensemble writing in a few minutes here, but I want you to hear this little clip of the same melody a couple years later, reorchestrated by Gil for Miles Ahead. So check this out. Same melody. Gil Evans, man, that's a whole nother story for another day. But Gil was inspired and Miles by JJ and his melodicism and his melodic sense. And then, of course, this comes later, but a favorite version for trombonists everywhere is, of course, Slide Hampton made an arrangement of this tune. Obviously, he's also from Indianapolis, another important trombone voice in the history of bebop trombone playing, modern trombone playing. But check out Slide Hampton has a great version of Lament as well. It's such a flexible tune. It's a beautiful, beautiful keep on moving here. But so J and K, if you didn't know, also kind of pioneered that ensemble. So that ensemble being the octet of trombones, because they have a J and K plus 6 that also came out in the late 1950s. The arrangements weren't all done by JJ in that particular case, but they were done by other members of the band, recorded mostly by like a West Coast band, but including J and K. J and K plus 6 is the name of that recording. There's some famous recordings of tunes like It's All Right With Me, Stardust, and A Night in Tunisia, another famous one. But so JJ's composition Lament has been recorded by a lot of people, but JJ not only was particular about writing in that melodic sense for whatever ensemble, but his identity as a composer, as an arranger, as a band leader is also, I think, drawn through the lens of how he plays other people's music, how he interprets standards, and how he presents his music to the world. So something I talk to my students all the time about is how JJ was not a person that just quote unquote called a tune and just rolled with it. JJ was a person who was meticulous and specific about how he wanted to present his music. And so one of the most famous ones is also from this eminent J.J. Johnson Volume 2, which, if you want to get really into the weeds here, Volume 2 on CD is different than Volume 2 on vinyl. So that's why there's different covers. But here we go. This is a famous arrangement of the tune Old Devil Moon. I think it really just shows kind of how JJ was so meticulous and so particular, and like in the way that he plays is got that polish pristine on it, and the way he arranges and presents music also has that precision sheen on it as well. Another famous and favorite one of mine from 1963, J.J. Johnson's Broadway, which is all different Broadway tunes. He arranges, of course, the hit song My Favorite Things from the time on Verve. And again, it puts a very specific kind of particular new way of looking at the tune. You could just play it like anyone else has played it, but he always finds a thoughtful way to present it. So you can check this out here. Get to hear that he only presents, that first part of the melody, and he doesn't present the famous part until the very end of the tune, which is kind of building up that tension, right? That's the part that people know and like. That's the hook of the song, and he doesn't give it to you to the very end. So I just think he has a very amazing way of doing a lot with a very little, which we've been talking about since that very first Quintergy clip, doing a lot with a very little. Now, I mentioned remembering kind of that Gil Evans sound and Gil Evans using his Lament arrangement. He's on the 1949 Birth of the Cool. He's on not all the tracks, but he was involved in the rehearsals. He was there. You can see some of the other people like Kay Winding is there, Lee Konitz, Max Roach, Jerry Mulligan, of course, all the people that that are on this recording. You can see which tracks that JJ is on playing parts. So he was hanging out with Miles, and they were talking about things and the language and the development of the language, and he was playing bebop seemingly at the beginning, but then they're already on to the next thing. This is 1949. This is the same time he was recording Elora, and he was recording and performing things like Bonology, and like JJ gets kind of put into this box as like the bebop trombone player, but he was pushing outside of that box and kind of pushing ahead and looking ahead to what was coming next. And you'll notice that also John Lewis is on this recording on some of the tracks, who becomes somebody that he hangs out with and starts pushing forward the music with. So he's on these tracks on Birth of the Cool, which leads him to compose and be involved in this kind of birth of the third stream. So if you don't know third stream music, it's kind of this cross-section of jazz and classical that was happening in this post-bebop era at the same time as the hard bop thing is kind of developing. And so JJ gets interested in kind of all this music and kind of what's happening there. And so this comes published in 1956, or written in 1956, this is, and just noticing some errors in my notes, some dates. But we have this 1956 piece, but it was released in 1957 on Columbia Records, that involves people that I just mentioned: Gunther Schuller, John Lewis, Jimmy Giuffre, and of course JJ. So this is called Poem for Brass. Now, Poem for Brass is for 6 trumpets, trumpet solo, trombone solo, 4 horns, 3 trombones, 2 baritones, and tuba, plus string bass and drums. So it's an odd ensemble. It's a very cool ensemble, and it goes to set up some later work, like the 1997 brass orchestra. So the brass orchestra is slightly different than this, but this is like his first major work kind of published, performed in this new way. So before I get too much in the weeds of talking about this, what you're going to hear and what I want you to listen to is kind of the influence of Gil. Gil Evans is going to influence the kind of some of the orchestration, especially with the inclusion of French horns, and you can sort of hear some of that, like Paul Hindemith kind of coming in there, Copeland. I was talking with Billy Childs when he was at UNT back in March, and he was saying that when he played with JJ, that he used to talk to him about classical music, and that JJ was really influenced by Hindemith. So you can hear some of that kind of stuff is in here, and you can even see, like at the bottom of the score here, it says copyright 1961 MJQ Music Modern Jazz Quartet. That's John Lewis. So all these guys are hanging out, it's when you start to dig into the details, it's pretty cool to see how these guys were hanging out with one another and exchanging ideas, just like we do with our friends, But I want you to hear this poem for brass. So check this out. We're going to hear just a couple of minutes of this so you can get an idea and a sense of how this translates into his future work. You can hear that stuff with the fourths, right? He's using similar stuff, similar shapes in a lot of the later music too. In Quinturgy that we heard, you can hear the kind of the blending of the bebop stuff. You can with the kind of classical stuff and the swinging, but like with this kind of abstract, dense harmony, but also constantly always with good melody. So after this comes out in 1957. Moving forward, we get a piece that JJ writes, conducted by Gunther Schuller, to feature Dizzy Gillespie. So obviously we've had the success of Miles Ahead and Miles Davis as a band leader with a large ensemble, but then we also get the record companies and the artists trying to use that as a framework to keep exploring musically and also to keep exploring kind of what's possible, you know. So you can see on here some of the musicians who are involved in this project as well to support Dizzy. Some of the same guys like Burning Glow are on both of these projects, and JJ obviously. You get Irby Green and Jimmy Knepper on trombones kind of playing there, and I mentioned already, but Gunther Schuller kind of conducting. And I think Rufus had mentioned that so they took some liberties here that JJ didn't appreciate in terms of like letting the rhythm section be involved a little more than was intended to be. But you know what's on here that's not on the last is harp, and the inclusion of 2 harps. So you can hear some similarities between JJ's orchestrations of the poem for brass, which is about a 10-minute piece, to this, which is like a 40-minute piece, a little bit longer, a little bit more involved with more pieces. But some of that music gets saved and reorchestrated and shared again later, which we'll see in a few minutes. But I want to just kind of play the opening track of this for you, some of the beginning of The Sword of Orion, which kind of you can hear similar kind of interplay between the sections. It's a similar ensemble: 6 trumpets, horns, trombones, two tubas. Here you got 2 harps, bass and percussion, rather than the baritones. So it's slightly more people. But check this out. You can still hear some of that American early 20th century classical music influence here. Similar to the other, he's got these long melodies but again, you can hear a couple years later, 4 years later, like a deeper sophistication in the way he's orchestrating this ensemble. More complicated tone signature changes. So you can hear it's not just blowing, right? It's a really through composed piece. So we're going to go to now 2 other movements here I want to share that are from this piece. So this one is called Horn of Plenty, and then we're going to hear it translated again in a minute. But check this out. Combining again. It's kind of contemporary classical sounds, so bebop. There's some swing. With hat sound, like from Gill. And so we're going to keep on moving forward here and go to the next piece I want to show you, which is this ballad. And it's just, I was eager to show this to you because not a lot of people get to see this with the score, and not a lot of people get to check this out and listen to the music and just hear what he was doing. So here's a little bit of ballad. Such dense orchestration. So it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So if you did not know that he was doing that, there you go. And that was happening in 1961. That came out in 1961. A lot of people think usually maybe you'd go, a small group to big band. But no, he went from small group to brass ensemble, kind of composing in this third stream style. And then he goes to LA and he starts recording big band music. He moves there to kind of become a film composer. So he's moving in a totally different way, but he had a contract to fulfill with this. These came out on RCA in 1967. So now he's kind of combining also this idea of unconventional instrumentation or with kind of that swinging big band era music. Maybe not the big band era, but like hard bop big band kind of thing. So one of his most famous tunes you can hear here, this is called Say When, and it's very well loved by trombone players everywhere. So there's the head of that. It's a little bit more traditional, more like just write a tune kind of thing. But then he was also writing, trying to explore some more different textures, even within the big band. It's another favorite called Shortcake. Just a mastery of the language, you know, the jazz language, kind of coming out of bebop, hard bop kind of thing. But then he's also being experimental. He's taking some of the stuff that he's doing from those pieces with the brass orchestras, the brass ensembles, and then kind of exploring with woodwinds and things on these records. So he's got two pieces, Euro Suite number 1, Euro Suite number 2. We're going to hear just like a little bit of that exploration here. Obviously French horns, woodwinds. It's the same kind of sensibility. You can tell it sounds like JJ's writing in the other pieces. Back to kind of including some kind of swing connection. It's Ron Carter on bass. Going all the way back to Lester Young, always still having that melodic, horizontal, melodic sense. And then probably one of his most famous, there was 2 records that were recorded at the same time in a couple of days, and they made 2 records out of it. One was the Total JJ, and then there's this one, JJ exclamation point. Well, this piece is one that he writes for the big band and also translates later to this brass orchestra record that we're going to explore in just a moment. So this is a piece of his called El Camino Real, and it's definitely one that trombone players love. He's got... there's there's a couple of recordings of trombone ensembles playing this, including, we did it at UNT this year with Steve Teray. So that was a lot of fun. But check this out. Just great writing featuring himself here. And move to hear that same bit, but with the brass orchestra. You can hear how he keeps some things the same, but then he also, adapts these things. So this was recorded in 1996, and of course, it also featured Rufus Reid. And so in the live version of this presentation, I talked to Rufus, kind of he can give us the kind of the inside scoop on some of this stuff with the brass orchestra. So check this out. It's the same piece originally for big band, but now adapted 30 years later for the brass orchestra. To my sensibility, he's really developing a lot of the ideas more thoroughly. So that's just amazing. Also, Rini is on this record. I forgot to mention that, in addition to Rufus, and also Victor Lewis playing drums there. But if you want to know, like on trombone, like Joe Alessi's on here, Robin Eubanks, Steve Teray, Jim Pugh playing all those great section parts. It's really something. And you can just hear how he revisited and kind of reorchestrated and developed those ideas both compositionally and improvisationally to present. And his solo is kind of similar, which is interesting between the two, to get to see which parts were written, which parts were maybe improvised. But I want to also show you a couple of moments here from the brass orchestra record where he is also referencing back to the Dizzy Gillespie Perceptions. And this time he features John Faddis, of course, coming out of Dizzy Gillespie lineage. And you can hear that same piece, that Horn of Plenty piece, but now interpreted by John Faddis. And he does the same thing here with that piece that he did with the last one, El Camino Real, where he's not just copy-paste, but it's like he's rethinking and redeveloping. And it's something that I think about, like, wow, if he can do it, rework something 30 years later, it's never too late to keep reworking a piece and see like how you can use it again or how you can readapt it. And I feel like Gil Evans was doing some of the same thing, kind of using some of his different ideas in different contexts over again in time, which helps, I think, to build that sonic identity for people of what your music sounds like, what you stand for. And so here's John Faddis playing part of Horn of Plenty. Yeah, and he's kind of building excitement a little faster in this version than the original version. Maybe it was a revision or a note he got, and he wanted to kind of do that. But it's really just interesting to kind of see. And the same thing with the ballad. There's no E on the end of it this time, but ballad. It's the same thing where he's kind of developing those ideas and not just copying and pasting. A different setup. Mutes, more moody, you know. Scale Evans. There's the melody. All right, so much different, so much more drama. And I think that's something that Rufus talked about a bit with me over the course of the project that we've been doing, is that, you know, JJ would often speak to drama as being one of the most important parts of his musical sensibility, creating drama, whether it's through dynamics, orchestration, etc. It wasn't just enough to just have the notes, you know, it's creating musical moments and creating drama through that music. It's just so amazing, like, that he would go back. I hate going back to my stuff. So revising something 30 years later, 35 years later, and not just like revising it a little bit, but just like taking the essence of it and totally reinterpreting it to fit a new situation. It's just amazing. And so in the live version of this talk, you know, we were able to get Rufus to kind of speak to these things. So if you missed it, I'm so sorry, but Rufus was really able to kind of shine a light, an insider's light, who was there on the session, about like how this all went down and kind of, what happened with this brass orchestra record. And, there's not that many brass orchestra pieces and brass orchestra records at all, no. And so it's really just a special thing that JJ did, and it was wanting to shine a light on it. So I hope through our conversation today you've been able to see just how vast his writing repertoire is. There's 2 records of big band stuff. There's the pieces for brass orchestra. There's this new record. There's the Dizzy Gillespie record. There's the original record from that birth of the third stream. JJ was right there the whole time. So even though, he was excluded from mention in the Ken Burns jazz, JJ was there and he was doing his thing. He was also doing film composing. I mentioned that quickly, but, he wrote for a lot of important works, a lot of popular works, at least. He was doing all kinds of things in LA during that time, but he wrote for some movies, including Cross 110th Street. He was involved with Shaft, Cleopatra Jones. He worked on the TV show like The $6 Million Man. He was doing a lot of work in that space, and I think that melodic sense, that's the through line of this whole thing, is that he used that his melodicism and his melodic sense combined with the different settings. So whether it was a bebop tune, whether it was something influenced by Gil Evans, something influenced by Miles, something influenced by Hindemith, something influenced by Mahler, something influenced by all of those things together, that individual melodic sense that he has kind of, I think, shines through all of this, all of these eras of J.J. Johnson, and he took time off. He came back, he was a perpetual perfectionist, it seems, and trying to quote unquote get the pieces right. You're trying to find a new way to present this music and those melodic ideas that he had. So to kind of wrap up, and get to the end of this presentation, I wanted to show you, something that we did kind of in the spirit of that drama, in the spirit of wanting to explore some of his music. He is this tune, Why Indianapolis, Why Not Indianapolis, which Rufus tells a story about, how they used to play this as a small group tune, and not just as this brass orchestra tune, but this is just a reduction, a lead sheet here, you can see. But I'll play for you quickly, just kind of the head in. But I think it's cool because he uses same simple fourths ideas. Gets the ensemble involved here. And then with one really fun, cool thing that happens at the end of this one, he's got a piece on the brass orchestra record for Bartok, so I know he's into Bartok Tool, but there's a Bartok as well, excuse me. And then he's got these moments of extreme So it's this really cool, I think, fusion of like all his influences and styles kind of put together, and I love that piece. I love what he did with it, and before we wrap up, I just want to share one thing that kind of came out of this. I mentioned the project is called Legacy, and it's a celebration of JJ and how he's influenced us all. So you can see here on the screen now, these are my students. This is the 1 O'Clock Lab Band. That's Steve Davis down front there, Billy Childs on the piano, Rufus on the bass, Alan Baylock, the conductor there. But we performed a new version of this tune that I wrote and arranged to try to take advantage of how many great trombonists we have at the University of North Texas. So I tried to take some of those special moments of Jay's, the way he orchestrates, blending the kind of obvious jazzisms with the kind of more abstract isms of the third stream. And so just check this out. I just wanted to share it because, we've been, talking about JJ all year, and my students have been an integral part of that. And I want to share the hard work that they put into this as well. So you can check this out. Trying to use some different techniques here. Cued conducting. Keeping it within the same realm, though. It was written for 10 parts. But obviously there's more 20-something cats on the stage. We're into the tune. Special one for me getting to play with Steve. Definitely an interesting experience trying to, take something where JJ wrote it for a large ensemble for brass and then translate it kind of backwards almost to translate it into playing for big band, right? So, in his trajectory, that brass orchestra stuff kind of was before big band. I mean, who knows what he wrote that was never published or played. There's some arrangements. I know that Ryan Truesdell, who was actually the producer of this project, and I owe huge gratitude to for helping me with the project, for pushing me towards doing the project, for coming and producing the session, for helping me with a lot of things along the way. So I want to say thank you to Ryan. I want to say thank you to Rufus for his help with this. Of course, to Rini Rosnes and Lewis Nash for being a part of the project, and for all of you for being here to hang out and kind of talk about this. I know this was a long video, and I hope you enjoyed some of the nuggets along the way. And I want to thank all of you for watching. I want to thank JJ for everything he did, for leaving us such a legacy. And I want to thank you for celebrating him this year, 2024. There's plenty of time left in this year, so I hope we can do something to continue to commemorate the great legacy he's left us and all the great music that he's created, and not just big band, not just small group, everything in between. And it's just amazing. So there's a couple of nuggets for you. I hope you've enjoyed. If you want to check out the project, you certainly can. It's called Legacy. It's available on all your favorite streaming services. And this fall, something special coming your way. I'll leave you in suspense to see what that might be. But it's been amazing. Thank you to the International Society of Jazz Arrangers and Composers for allowing me to connect with everyone and put this together. I hope that everyone had a great conference if you went to Nashville for that this year. And if not, I hope you've enjoyed this and a little bit of insight into JJ and his large ensemble writing. So thank you again so much. Thanks for being here, being a part of this channel. If you liked what we saw today, go ahead, like, subscribe, leave a comment. It's always appreciated to know what you all think of these videos and kind of where we should head. And I hope this is informational. And I know it was dense, and I know there's a lot of great music that you got to hear. And yeah, can't wait to share more with you this year. And happy practicing, and we'll catch you in the next video. Later.